This is Big Man Tyrone, and you're about to watch the MtG Cabal cast with your hosts, Woad, Thirsty, and Reptar. Sub to us on all your podcast networks at MtG Cabal Cast and YouTube.
Welcome to the newest episode of the Cabal Cast, guys. This week, we're getting into something a little bit more esoteric, more abstract, something that kind of influences finance and at large has a lot more to do with the design philosophy of magic and a little bit to do with long-term financial viability of certain things. Mm-hmm. And that's something I like to call the Simpsons syndrome. Way back in the day, The Simpsons was the most influential piece of pop culture in the world. If you were on The Simpsons, you made it. Now we've gotten to the point where The Simpsons has been around for so long, it's starting to borrow from other IPs, other pieces of pop culture to continue to stay relevant. How that relates to magic is in set design. So one of the prime examples that we'll start out with is Innistrad.
Yes.
Now, Innistrad, keep in mind, was released in about 2011, and Mero has said that magic sets are designed in a 2 to 3 year time frame. The reason that's relevant is because in about 2008, we hit the Twilight craze in True Blood. So we had this huge surge of interest in pop culture with vampires and werewolves and all kinds of stuff like that influenced them to go into this realm. And there's other examples that I'm sure you can think of. What you got off the top of your head?
So the one I liked, the first one that I thought about was actually harkening back to the early days of Magic in Arabian Knights, where that set is pulled almost 100% from the book Arabian Knights. The reason there are so many named places and so many unique characters that have names that you are familiar with is because Arabian Knights was just ripped straight.
Yep.
The Aladdin, Scheherazade, Magnetic Mountain, these are all from the book Arabian Nights. And
the set, unlike Arabian Days, more often than not, was not hotter than hot.
Back then, no. Now, it's hotter than the sun.
Yes, it is.
In a lot of good ways.
Yeah.
That's the one that first comes to mind because it's been the easiest call out for, you don't even have to be like a student of literature, really. Like, you've heard a lot of these tales in passing, so a lot of these things just kind of click. Even historically, the Library of Alexandria matters. You know?
Yeah. The pyramids matter.
Yep. City in a Bottle, King Solomon, things like that. They're all relevant. People have heard them, and like a lot of things are also referenced biblically too, so it kind of makes sense. And cross religion, so it created this really interesting space for Magic where they just started a broad appeal to a lot of people by just taking what is a literary classic and designing a set, I guess, top down.
Yeah.
Because a lot of things were already set up and what they had to do. And
it's not just sets, it can be longer term.
Oh yeah.
So in 2008, I think Iron Man was released, and then in like 2011 was when we got the firm, hey, we're making this Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's going to be great. There's going to be so many movies in it. It's going to be the best cinematic universe you've ever heard. Mm-hmm. And the Avengers took off. And then a few years later, the Gatewatch was formed. Khans of Tarkir released about 2 to 3 years after that.
Yes.
Now, the key point with both of these is that when you see something like Twilight and you know it's an ongoing saga that's going to be relevant in pop culture, when you see something like the Marvel Cinematic Universe and you know it's going to be relevant for years, those are the type of things that a company like Hasbro will hop on.
Yes.
Not just because Hasbro has the licensing for the toys, but because it's something that's longer term and can have more staying power, as opposed to something like, Game of Thrones was 3 to 4 years, and that was all it was going to be. That's the entire design of a set. So by the time they would release a Game of Thrones set, it would stop being relevant.
Yes.
Whereas now, Kamigawa Cyberpunk Shadowrun set is coming out, supposedly.
Yeah.
This year we have a Viking set.
Yep, we're going back into. Not going back to. Hopefully we get. Our Norse mythology there, which people have been clamoring for a while. It's not quite. Is it Chandalar? It's not. It's not that plane which they've expressed they were going to go to eventually, but they did say, a quote-unquote Viking plane was on the way, and, here we are, headed to Stormheim.
Yeah.
And we can expect to see, much like with Arabian Knights, a callback to some very specific things, and it's going to be very top-down level design. Whether we get a ton of Norse mythology, with Odin, Thor, Freya, Loki, Fenrir, Fenris, Jormungandr, the World Tree, Yggdrasil, Ratatosk, like all that stuff, don't know. But they have the ability to, like with Arabian Nights, because they're picking this huge IP to pull from if they want.
Yeah.
I want a rainbow bridge. I'm putting it out there.
That would be great.
Another planar portal with a Heimdallr to send us through.
That would be great.
Yeah.
And then, so not only in pop culture, you also have other games that are influencing things. So Hearthstone released League of Explorers,
Something
I think
like
it
that.
was.
Yeah.
Was one of their first expansion sets. And a few years later, we had Ixalan.
Mm-hmm.
At which point we were hearkening back to something that was widely considered one of the most popular sets ever released in Hearthstone at the time. And so this is when you start to see this kind of pop culture influence on things. Mm. So you may be asking... Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I like Ixalan not just for the Hearthstone callback, but Jurassic World was released in 2015, about 3 years before Ixalan drops. So it's not like you have all this pressure for dinosaurs, but now they're in the zeitgeist again with Jurassic World, completely rebooting the Jurassic Park franchise, and the movie did well. So It makes sense that you can kind of put this all together and make, finally, dinosaurs a thing in Magic.
So you might be wondering, why is this relevant? How do we pay attention to this? Well, as with most things on the speculation side, it's a lot more art than science.
Mm-hmm.
One of the first things to look at, for me, when I'm looking at Neon Kamigawa, Lords of Internet, well, if we're going to stay in Magic, what's something we can't really have? Robots. We can have everything else, but we can't have robots. But Magic has constructs. So if Cyberpunk 2077 and the Cyberpunk revival wave that's coming is going to influence Kamigawa Ghost in the Shell, then constructs might be something to look at financially. So just thinking about it in the abstract, this is something that you can be aware of where it may pay off, it may not. And I think for me, it's been something that is a lot more long-term, and it's a lot more low investment, go deep for me rather than go wide.
Yeah.
At least for me personally, I know you had expressed that it wasn't necessarily something you were always super in tune with or paying attention to, but that it was still something that, obviously has an influence on the financial aspect of Magic.
Oh, definitely. Looking at the set, I'm going to bring up some of the images that were in the original WotC survey, and they look fairly, video game-esque. These could harken back to eras in Final Fantasy. This could harken to something like Global Agenda produced by Hi-Rez, where characters looked very angular like this. And it can basically pull the same kind of weight that the Final Fantasy card game does by appealing to people who like JRPG style. The Final Fantasy card game, I've never heard anybody want to play that, but they'll collect it.
People love it, though. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
The art and the card stock is great.
Yeah. And so this is one of those things. It's just a low investment, and if the art is great and it harkens back to IPs that people enjoy or plays similarly to something like a game from their childhood, this is definitely something that people are going to look at for long term. And sealed might even be more of a place to be than singles in the long run.
And I think that's, looking at that. So if we do, obviously it's just a leak at this point. We may not actually go back to Legends of future Kamigawa. But when you mention sealed, what's some stuff that could be relevant? One, for Kamigawa. Well, obviously Kamigawa.
Yep.
And two, what could be relevant for Cyberpunk? Well, we haven't had a whole lot of futuristic type stuff.
No.
But you can look at creature types. So in your general cyberpunk setting, you're going to have humans, you're going to have trolls, goblins, robots, or constructs, and stuff like that. So if you're just thinking about it when you hear these things, you can start brainstorming on what you may want to spec on. And that allows you to get very far ahead of the game in terms of when speculators start to move in on this stuff. We've all seen when Ixalan got spoiled, Ramirez de Pietro spiked because it was a legendary pirate. Great.
Sure, yeah.
If you'd been paying attention, you may have gotten in on that ahead of time, and you may have known, well, if we're going to go pirates, sure, why not? And gotten in much sooner. The day they announced it was a pirate theme, I bought a bunch of Ramirez de Pietro for $2, and within a month, Card Kingdom was paying $5 on them, and I just shipped them all off because I didn't want to deal with it.
Get up. Yeah.
But this is one of those areas of speculation that is a lot more into the weeds than I think a lot of people tend to get, which means it's a really good opportunity for you to get some gains.
Oh, absolutely. You have to think fairly critically on this too. Where are we going and what is going to be relevant? Off the top of my head, looking at Stormheim and Strixhaven, if we're going back to a Norse set, it's most likely going to have some kind of equipment or vehicle-based theme, and we'll get there a little bit when they start describing the set after Commander Legends, and you can start picking and choosing what you want to look at in that regard. We're probably not going to get Loxodon Warhammer back in that set, but you know what? It's probably not a bad card to invest in if there's going to be a lot of equipment-based sub-themes in that set. Similar to Strixhaven, I joke about this all the time. Like, Sphinx Bone Wand is a great EDH card. It's basically, for years I've said it's my little Harry Potter wand because it just, every time you cast a spell, it just keeps ticking up damage.
Yeah.
Could that card come back? Absolutely. Could it be something to pick up ahead of time if we know we do get like the wizard spell slinging theme? Again, absolutely. And then that also partners with Aetherflux, Reservoir, and Sentinel Tower, or whatever it is, I think, out of Battlebond, the better Sphinx's Bone one. It's kind of stuff like that. You need to pay attention to the sub-themes that are going to go on, and then you can try and move in and make your way accordingly. Ixalan's a great thing to point out, because throughout Magic we have had pirates, but none have been incredibly relevant. Mercadia was the first time we really got like an actual pirate theme to a set with the Rishadans, because they're just natively a market-based economy and peoples. So you had a bunch of those pirates, and setting aside this stupid sea stompy thing, there wasn't a lot to be made in Mercadian Mass because those pirates weren't great. None of them were really that worthwhile. So you go back further and you look into Legends, things that are just completely out of print and low pop to begin with. And that's why that particular pirate works out. There's really no dinosaur subtype prior to Ixalan, so there's nothing to spec on. There's never been a dinosaur lord unless you want to count Grimlock, who I think might have come later.
Yeah.
Like, you had Deathmist Raptor, which is obviously a dinosaur, and like I think one more obvious dinosaur that was a beast, but none of them really cared for dinosaurs. There's no synergies ahead of time. So it's kind of whatever. Like, it's really about the sub-themes that you see. If there's a hint of a ninja sub-theme and if we go back to Kamigawa, you can expect like not Urian, that's the companion, Yuriko and like Ninja the Deep Hours and all this other stuff with ninjutsu to just pop. Because they're ninjas, and that's what ninjas do. They just flip out and kill shit.
And similar to, knowing we're going to return to Innistrad.
Yes.
I think this is only our second return to Innistrad. Well, we know it's vampires and werewolves, so some of those lords may see a pop.
Yeah.
They may also be reprinted. So that's one of the things that you have to assess, like, well, how likely is Vampire Nocturnus to be reprinted here? Well, what can't be reprinted is Baron Senger.
Yes.
There's an option, and last I checked, he was still fairly affordable and reserve list.
Yes.
And it's something that, you don't necessarily have to think out as far as a potential leak or spoiler. It may be something that when Wizards does this and they say, here's the next year, cool, what am I looking at?
Start looking ahead for thematic cards. things to just
Yeah.
keep your eyes on. You don't need to buy in immediately. You don't need to just track movement on them. Like I said before, this is the part where you can start critically thinking, okay, if we're going to D&D land and the next year is going to be very party focused on clerics, wizards, rogues, and whatever the third one is, does it matter if I pay attention to creature types, or does it matter if I pay attention to like equipment, or is it something spell based? There's a lot that's going to happen between now and then, but you need to start weeding down what you're caring about.
Yeah.
Don't get too far into this stuff.
And it's easy to jump down the rabbit hole and get lost. So just, try to rein it in, or don't, I guess, whatever. If you don't want to. But, and I think that it's also nice when Wizards kind of lines it up like this. It makes it a little bit easier because we know thematically, we're dealing with rogues, clerics, warriors. We're dealing with wizards because Strixhaven is a wizard academy.
Mm-hmm.
We know we're dealing with vampires and werewolves. So this is an interesting time to kind of like, okay, well, let's look back and see what the big pop culture influences were a few years ago and try to see how they impact this. Or try to see, 2 to 3 years ago was when D&D was making all the rounds with podcasts and Dan Harmon and everyone else that was doing, like, making nerd culture mainstream. So now 2 to 3 years later, we have a D&D set in Magic the Gathering to try to get that audience that got into D&D to maybe experiment a little bit with Magic to see if they can get new blood into it, because I don't know if a pro tour is even going to happen anytime in the future. This game may go 100% casual. Who knows?
Well, and that set's also good for an LGS that has a D&D community, because you can point them to the Magic D&D stuff, and then that's the middle of your Venn diagram, and then move them into the Magic product as a whole when that set comes out. So it works for an LGS, and it also helps bring in an older crowd that used to play D&D and they might have played Magic. Maybe it'll bring them back and reinvigorate as well. That one in particular is going to be a really interesting set to pay attention to, like all the articles that come out about it, anything they write about the set, any like on my drive to works, or what Morrow does on his commute about that set in particular. Like, all of this stuff is going to be great. Anything that comes straight from WotC is what you're going to want to pay attention to. Something that it's hard to probably a little harder to figure out is what to cash out on based on what we're seeing. So I completely forgot that we had spoiled in Commander Legends the fact that we're going to get the other 5, I don't know what you want to call them, Commander dual lands, like ETB untapped if you have more than X number of opponent lands, and the blue-red one is going to be named Training Center. Well, if your Wizards are going to go to a training center, does that mean you're also going to have a training grounds in that set?
Yeah.
Is that a card that you should be looking to get out of before spoiler season gets hot and heavy? And the same could be said for anything up and coming. That's just like certain cards have just been, ticking away. Do we get another Caverner Souls reprint, or the Ixalan Uncommon land that's played alongside it in Humans that I can't remember off the top of my head? That one that makes 5C for any creature because they made a worse version in Zendikar.
Why can't I remember?
It's not Uncharted territory.
Yeah. I can't remember.
I'm wrong. Whatever I said was wrong. I know that for a fact, but they made a worse version of it. Unclaimed territory? Something like that. It's a 5C creature land. All it does is cast creatures. That's it. And not Ancient Ziggurat, but the one that was in the Sliver command deck. Like there are a bunch of Creature Matters lands out there. They're in the Humans deck in Modern and Legacy. I don't know the names of them. It's going to take me a while to find them. I didn't think this far in advance. Those could be in we could be looking at those in the D&D set because they help you cast your party. The one we just got is absolute garbage compared to what we got in Ixalan 2 years ago. And like 2 years before that in Avacyn Restored. There's no way that we could not get another one. But that could be something you get out of, because if they're going to reprint any of them into Standard, it's just going to crater the value of them. So something to pay attention to in the announcements if they really center things around the party. Keep an eye on it. Ditch as necessary. Put it that way. But it's it's something interesting to think about in regards to this because they pull from all over the place, and looking years out is difficult because sometimes it just doesn't happen naturally. There are a lot of themes that we could have expected thus far that kind of fit into like nerd culture or whatever you want to call it that just aren't good enough to make it into Magic, even as this fleshed out idea. Like we've talked about ninjas and pirates and robots, so to speak, and like that the holy trinity, if you do want to call it that, did exist in Magic for a very long time, but they've never existed side by side for that kind of goofiness. You know? But it has come to be. They've pulled from other movie properties that have made infinite money over the years, but we've never seen a set dedicated to it. We talked about like possible predictions, and we talked about Arthurian legend and how it can be fleshed out if they wanted to, probably better for another throne set. Where's Avatar? That's made infinite money. They're in the process of making the first of the next
Ask
5.
James Cameron, I guess. Yeah. I have no idea.
They're in the process of making the next 5. To believe that there's zero overlap between people that enjoy that and Magic is ridiculous. And even stealing a little bit from Avatar, you know, you can still infuse that into sets. And you could say, oh, like the cores from Zendikar kind of fit the Avatar bill. The Na'vi, they just kind of live off the land and they just like float around and ride shit. Yeah, sure, but you could steal a little more. Yeah. Where is it? Don't know. You know.
And that's where the art plays into it, is trying to figure out what's going to be relevant. Because, you know, look, a couple of years ago, if you'd told me that we were going to have a cyberpunk revival in pop culture, I mean, there wasn't Altered Carbon. We just knew Cyberpunk 2077 was coming. Mm-hmm. But without the Blade Runner sequel, without Altered Carbon, without stuff like that, we may have never had this.
Yeah.
So it's just something that, you know, looking at what you've got that's coming up, all right, well, if we do go the, you know, cyberpunk route, maybe there's some stuff I can pick up to fill out my $2 card on TCG Player. Mm-hmm. Maybe there's a $1 or $2 card I can pick up that'll fill out a trade or something.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And just trying to even out stuff like that is probably the way you're going to get most of your value out of this, rather than being an MTG slumlord such as myself and mass buying, like, I don't know, the Mirror Galvanizer because maybe we get a bunch of constructs that combo. If that's your cup of tea, do it. I mean, that's what I'm doing. Yeah. But it's
Micah Synth Golem, the better choice.
Yeah, much.
Yeah, yeah.
Too good. Not for me.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, too rich for your blood.
Yeah.
No, it's definitely interesting to see where things go and work on the prediction and how what's in the cultural zeitgeist fits into some of this stuff, especially from years ago, with their and how they plan out their sets, their design, and their futures testing. None of this matters to a vendor.
No.
At all. But there's definitely an avenue you can take when it comes to financing and speculation as we move closer towards the set. And like I said, you keep getting those announcements and you can actually see what's going on within its set itself.
Yeah.
So, if I was a betting man and we do go back to Kamigawa Neon Knights or whatever the heck that's called.
Kamigawa 2 Cyberpunk Boogaloo.
Yes.
That's the official name. You heard it here first.
I think Neon Knights is a level in Turtles in Time. That's neither here nor there.
Yeah.
Which is like
a great game.
It is like the Cyberpunk level to be fair.
Yeah.
I would expect that set to be just huge callbacks to like every JRPG that's ever been huge in the US. Yeah. So that's like across all Final Fantasy properties, the Chrono properties, Earthbound, Mother, whatever you want to call it, Secret of Mana, that kind of stuff. And if it is that, you know, the way we go and they step back from what they did with the original Kamigawa was just all this like great Japanese lore, a lot of names and a lot of places, and they just step back to something a little more generic and a little more powerful. Sorry, a little more generic and a little more powerful compared to the original Kamigawa. I think the set is going to be easier to finance on. It's going to be easier to kind of pick and choose what you're looking at when it comes to older stuff. You know, if they make a Cyberpunk set and they don't put all the interesting vehicles in it, you can probably look at some of those vehicles as being like thematically relevant to play and like fit the theme overall. Fleet Wheel Cruiser. Holding strong. But it is definitely something to do in the interim.
especially while we're kind of like in a financial lull here with no real events happening and
Unless you read
in-store play getting suspended again.
Or you like reading fuzzy spoilers in German for Commander Legends. That's your bag. By all means, go for it.
Go for it.
Yeah. Otherwise, straight into picks, and I'm going first. So,
all right, go for it.
I'm making a Handbrake 180, and I'm going with a Pioneer card this week, and I'm going with Niv Mizzet Reborn. So this card finally finished its downfall. It looks like it's in a plateau, so we're in a good spot to buy. The buy price overall on CK isn't anything to write home about. It did increase by about 30 cents from last week when I picked it to now, but they are buying fewer copies. The foil is holding strong on buy list, and that might be where I look compared to the regular set version. And I like this card because if Pioneer's making a comeback, this is one of the premier combo decks in the format. According to MTG Meta, it is in the top 5, it is number 5. Outside of that, Lotus Field is several spots down in the meta. And this is a combo deck to me that looks and feels like Birthing Pod, where every turn you have a choice about what you want to do, and there's so much action, so much play, and so much customization to this deck. It's going to be very difficult to interact with this deck as a player in the format, unless you're just going to like beat it super quick with like mono black aggro and tear its hand apart. And from a WotC perspective, it's going to be very difficult to deal with this deck with any kind of banning because it uses so much of the Buffalo.
Yeah.
This has to be a 5-card deck through and through. And sure, it plays Uro, and if you ban that card, that's perfectly fine because it doesn't rely on it. It adds a little bit of velocity, but it's not a cornerstone to the deck. This thing plays like Nicol Bolas the Ravager. It's playing Omnath Locus of Creation now, Tolsimir, Friend of Wolves. Like, I have the list up. You can see Sylvan Caryatid. And then the list of spells is just like the greatest hits in the format, including 4 Bring to Light, which really let this thing go. Lets it rip. This is also a deck in Modern. Not as popular, but it is definitely coming up. It has the ability to protect itself there poorly with Force of Negation, so it can interact on its opponent's turn, but not on the combo turn in quotes. But it can do a little more powerful things because you have like Voice of Resurgence, which is super good to protect yourself early on and can work with some of the sacrifice effects that you can play in that format for value. And with the uptick in, like I said, Pioneer, and the ability for this card to have play in 2 formats, as well as a card in the quote-unquote 99 in EDH, this makes this, to me, a multi-format kind of staple right now, and I like that. The timeline I have for this, I really think it's going to be 6 months at a minimum, and if you can buy in at 4, maybe around 5, that's probably when you're going to really be able to get out at value. If you get in any higher than that, you're going to have to wait for paper to return. And I know that sucks, and I can't give you a timeline on that. Like, I bought a bunch of these last week, and I've resolved myself to letting them go when paper comes back. Because I'm greedy, and I didn't buy a whole lot. So I want to double or triple up on my, like, $2 investment.
Nice.
Whatever, I'll slumlord it.
That'll go eventually.
If you're fine tucking money away in foils, I would actually suggest the foils for this. They are kind of running out, and they're about $15, $16 right now. So picking up, a couple, probably not the worst idea. This is a 4 of in both 3 or 4 of in both formats. So, and it always has a home. You're not stretching it on a 1 of. And the longer we play this game, the more 5-color might become something in EDH. So there's always the possibility that it either takes over the commander slot or it becomes more popular in the 99. As a card, it's like the commanders are kind of weird. I'll bring it up because it's worthwhile. They're all over the place. Everything from Sisse to Progenitus. So what is this card doing? Everything. You have to build. It puts some very serious constraints on your deck in EDH as the general, but in the 99 it's kind of passable because you can whiff a little bit and you'll still get your value and you're okay with it. But this is something that I like now. I like for the next couple of months. I think the time to buy in is right now because, like I said, it's bottomed out and plateauing, and I don't see this staying this cheap for too much longer. Also, when I was looking around to buy these last week, Japan is entirely sold out of English copies. They had like infinite in Japanese, but no English. So they've already been arbitraged out of Japan. I didn't check MKM because that mail is heinously slow.
Especially now, it's
Yeah.
not worth arbitraging, honestly.
I didn't want to buy quantity, pay customs to ensure that it made it to me because I have lost cards to customs in the past couple of years. And I'll leave that to other people who either can route it a little differently or maybe make a trip over and get it themselves. But either way, I think this is the card for me right now. It should be for you.
I agree. I think it's a really solid pick as well, especially when you said touching on the foils. Not only do you get the constructed playability, but obviously if you're going to foil one card in your deck, it's going to be your commander. So mine is kind of in a similar boat. It was up for a little bit and then fell and has plateaued in a valley, and that would be Divine Visitation from Return to Ravnica Part 2 Electric Boogaloo. And that is right now sitting at $8 TCG low, which according to MTG Stocks, it's been at for about a month now.
Yeah.
This is a card similar to Sigil of the Empty Throne that's just a big, dumb, white EDH card that makes angels.
Mm-hmm.
You know what people love? Big,
Boy.
dumb, white EDH cards that make angels. Love them! And at a price of $8, when as recently as June this year, it was hitting like 15 to 20, I think that's perfectly reasonable, especially because we're still sitting at a market right now of about 13, which means there's not a lot of people moving into this card right now. So there's a good opportunity to get in. I will say this is strictly EDH. Probably never going to see play in anything except maybe Enchantress and Legacy, if that ever becomes a thing again. Just because it makes your clock a little bit faster, but it's kind of win more in that deck.
Oh my god, this works so well with Bearscape if you want to get on the memes from years ago.
Right?
Turn your bears into angels.
Yeah. And I think timeline-wise, you're probably looking at about, I'd say it's going to hold through the holidays.
Really?
Probably about 6 to 10 months. And that depends on largely if we get GPs back. And the reason I say that is because a lot of the big financial movement on some of these EDH cards is when they get mass bought out on like TCG or MKM or Haruruya, and it's just like 2 or 3 people doing it. It's vendors. And it's vendors who are sourcing it differently. Like you said, they'll message one of the guys at Galactus and just be like, yo, I'm going to have these shipped to you. Can you bring them to me at the next GP you're at? And they just stock their booth with them. And without that arbitrage happening right now, it's pretty much all static in terms of movement. You don't have someone that's buying quantities of Unbound Flourishing to move to a GP and sell there. So right now, you've got them available. You can get foils of Divine Visitation for the market price of non-foils on MKM. Again, not that you'd really want to deal with that arbitrage because it's a mess, but it is an opportunity there.
Yeah.
Additionally, when you look at Haruruya, for example, they are sold out of foils, but they do have English available for about the same price as what they are in the States. So it's just a really good opportunity to get on something that has good mid to long-term EDH value. And once vendors start happening again, because this is a card you would regularly see on a board for 10 to 12 bucks when 14 was low. And knowing that that's one of your venues, getting in now for the potential that happens later is where I'd want to be at with this. That said, you're not exactly hurt on liquidity because EDH is still happening. It's just that based on lack of price movement, lack of quantity movement, because it's been fluctuating with about a 5 to 10% weekly shift one way or the other, you don't have an absurd amount of liquidity. So this is one of those things that for me, I'm going to buy it, I'm going to stash it in a box under the bed, and a box of specs, and then when GPs hit, I'm going to go through, I'm going to grab the team bag of them, look up the price, see that it's worth more money, and sell it to a vendor. So that's where I'm at on it.
I like it. The only thing I disagree on is the timeline. I think we might see this hit faster with a Jumpstock restart and the fact that there's at least one or two tokens themes in there. I was just looking at the list because could have sworn there was one. And Commander Legends, and we still don't know what all the cards are going to be in there. This could be one of those things where it's like, okay, these Jumpstart comes back, so all the Commander personalities that usually stream and put videos up are finally able to get their hands on that product and start building with it. And Commander Legends hits hopefully before the holidays, and people are able to get their hands on that. Similarly, we might see this card pop up in videos, which means there could be that kind of that rush to it. So
the bump,
yeah. So I don't disagree with anything else. I just think there is the opportunity for the timeline to be a little shorter, and I could see maybe like 3 being the earliest this would happen, because that would give basically through the holidays and people time to pick this product up and be doing Christmas shopping or maybe for themselves or holiday shopping for themselves, whatever. Otherwise, yes,
fair,
hands down, agreed. And this just plays so well in EDH across so many different color pairings and ideas for what you want to be doing. You can play.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess the ultimate way to this would just be play Bant and just infinite token makers with doubling season. And just go nutty, primal
parallel
figure,
lives,
whatever.
Unbound Flourishing, all that stuff for sure.
Yeah. And I'm honestly surprised. I was honestly surprised at how expensive it was, because to me this is still sub $10. But then at the same time, I'm surprised it's been holding for so long. So this kind of caught me off guard twice. Once due to my own idiocy, which is fair. So
it also has, one of the things I like about it is it's from the same era as Smothering Tithe.
Yeah.
Which was an EDH staple that we immediately saw have value and maintain it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's something that is a little bit more indicative of what you could see happen with Divine Visitation.
Yeah.
Because Smothering Tithe is a rare and Divine Visitation is a mythic. So it may have a little bit higher of a ceiling on that just because it is such a Timmy mythic.
Yeah. It's so interesting too. Divine Visitation is this interesting taxing effect, just like Ristic Study, so it fits into more themes overall. It's like, okay, I'm playing white, I might as well just like land tax, It's just this kind of ubiquitous card that white doesn't really get a lot of. And not every white deck is going to be making tokens like this, but you can bet your bottom dollar that a lot of blue decks, or a lot of green decks, or a lot of Bant decks are going to be making tokens. And at that point, these are probably some of the largest tokens you can make just by making a singular token. It just poops a 4/4 if you make a 1/1. That's amazing. The only time it gets worse is when you have actually hardcast Shark Typhoon, and then or Metallurgic Summonings, and you have to figure out how you want to. No, I think you just get Host. I think you just get 4/4s. But it's really good with Kratos of Behemoth.
Yeah.
End of story. It still ends games with the Huff.
Hoof, there it is.
Exactly.
All right.
But I think with that's going to be it for us this week, guys. I think this is 103, so next week we'll mark our 2-year anniversary, and we'll either drink ourselves to death on the cast reviewing bad picks if we can get all those numbers, or maybe we'll have an actual topic to discuss. Who knows?
I want to do the first one.
Right. I had to tell coworkers that 9 a.m. was too early to start the other day.
Nice.
It doesn't matter what client you're working with. 9 a.m. is still too early.
Yeah.
But on that note, we are MTG Cabalcast on Twitter, Patreon, Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, Facebook. I'm at Halt Iron Reptar on Twitter. We can find you at
Thirsty Sizzler.
And you don't have to subscribe or like, but leave us a comment anywhere you feel like. Let us know what you do or don't like about the cast, so we can keep improving on it. And we'll see you guys next week.